We've been working through our I Am series in the Gospel of John, looking at the times that Jesus described himself in I am language. Today we're going to look at John chapter 10, and there are two straight I am passages here. We're just going to be looking at the first one. It bleeds a little over into the second one because they're connected. But next week we'll talk about I am the good shepherd. This week we're going to talk about I am the gate for the sheep, which is kind of a strange saying in a lot of ways. But this text we have today is filled with tropes from the ancient world, figures of speeches, metaphors. They're tropes that we may not use today. They may not be exactly the way that we speak, the kind of figures of speech we use, but we can locate these problems in these people in our world today. For example, Jesus talks about robbers and thieves, and particularly talks about them in ways that they kill and destroy, and they try to fake, they try to confuse, they try to prey on people who are vulnerable. And we have people like that in our world today too. The kind of people who prey on vulnerable people by deceit are maybe the sort of people who write an email that shows up in your inbox that says, I am a prince from some far off place, and I have access to $50 million that I want to smuggle into the United States of America. And if you would send me your routing number and your account number, I will deposit it in there and we will split it 50-50. Who falls for that stuff? I didn't say this in the first service, but it just reminded me. I saw another one this week that cracked me up. Someone wrote on either Twitter or Facebook, did you know the algorithm of this, whatever social media it was, works so that if you put your bank account number in, it automatically X's it all out? And the next one it said, look, and it said XXX, XXX, and then people started trying it and said, oh, it didn't work for me. Who are these people? Hopefully none of us. We're all wiser than that, right? But in so many ways we aren't. Somebody's falling for it. Sometimes it's you or your grandma or your grandma's friend, or you heard a story. People are deceived. But sometimes there's also socially acceptable ways to deceive people. Like, for example, the lottery, which Dave Ramsey once called a tax on people who are bad at math. That's a good line right there. You should write that down and use it. Or casinos, the house always wins, right? The house always wins. Desperate people are the ones who are preyed on. People who have an account that is sufficient don't fall for these sort of things. It is people who are hurting and struggling and afraid and don't know what's next, who will roll the dice at just about anything if it can help them out of the situation that they can't find a way out for themselves. There's another trope in this particular text today about gatekeepers. Who it is that is a gatekeeper. And we don't have a whole lot of gates and gatekeepers in our world today. I went golfing this week with a couple guys from church, and I drove by, and it was a nice course, but they had like one of these like military looking gate things at the front. They'd spent money building this edifice, and there was no one in it. Gatekeepers aren't necessarily just the people who patrol, right? In our world, gatekeepers are people who try to keep people out, who define who is in and who is out, and they enforce it. And the best way that this trope is used, I think, in our world today is in comedy movies where people who are not cool run into a bouncer trying to get into a club that is cool. This is used all of the time in movies, in TV shows, to try to get at the humor of uncool people, unwanted people, undesirable people trying to sneak their way in by being rich enough, good-looking enough, strong enough, whatever it is, to be welcome. One movie that had this that I went looking for a bunch of clips. It's hard to find clean ones, but I found one clean one from a movie about 20 years old now called A Night at the Roxbury. It was a joke from Saturday Night Live. So check this out. The uncool guy is trying to get past the big, tough bouncer. That's about $8.15 right there, worth of effort to get into a place that they weren't cool enough or welcome enough to go in. Gatekeepers. They look like bouncers in our world today. But gatekeepers are about separating those who are in and those who are out. The text today talks about all of these sort of things, but in a way of the ancient world. It's about who is in, who is out, who is cool, who is not, who has a way or access to the inside, and who has no chance. The story goes and begins in chapter 9 before what we're going to read today. And there's a break here in the text that's been put by editors later on to separate chapter 9 from chapter 10. And it probably isn't real helpful to our reading of the text where this break is, because the story doesn't really stop. Chapter 9 leads into where we're at today. And here's the issue at play that leads to this conversation that we're going to read from Jesus. We have a man who was born blind. Now, you would think in this one situation that you might already have empathy for this guy. Being born blind sounds like a very difficult way to live, especially for those of us who have spent our whole life able-bodied, capable of seeing without even thinking. Those of us who have struggled towards blindness in our life have gone to a doctor and put glasses on, prescribed for us so that we can see again. Now, imagine you have been born blind. That life might be difficult enough. But in the ancient world of Israel that they're in there, not only are they born blind, not only do they have this inability to see, but they have also had labeled upon them, thrust upon them, even crushing down upon them, a belief by everyone that sees them that the reason they're born blind is because they're a sinner. This is the consequence of what they have done. And so the story begins by a blind man coming to Jesus and people asking, hey, tell us, whose fault is it that he's blind? Is it his fault because he's a sinner? Or is his parents' fault because they sinned? Now, being blind is hard enough, but every time you walk into a public square, people begin to wonder what sin you have committed. It's a scarlet letter of its time. Everyone doesn't see blind man, they see sinner. That's a burden to carry, to say the least. Jesus sees this burden, wants to release this burden, so he heals the blind man. The blind man is now able to see, and he begins to praise God and to tell everyone that this has happened. But the Pharisees are not happy at all. They cannot join in the praising of God because someone has been healed. For them, they look for every single excuse they can possibly find to deconstruct Jesus' argument that he is good and holy and even the Son of God. This time, their problem isn't that Jesus healed the man, it is that he has chosen to heal the man on the Sabbath, the day of rest. Oh, they said, if this really was a man from God, he would know better than to work on the Sabbath. Now that is reading between the lines of the law through and through. God is a restorer on the Sabbath, and Jesus is saying he has come as the embodiment of God in the world. Man doesn't work on the Sabbath, but as Jesus would say, the Sabbath is for man, not the other way around. And so the Pharisees are in an absolute tizzy. They are investigating and questioning everyone involved, trying their hardest to discredit what it is that Jesus has done, finding every nook and cranny of the law to prove that Jesus is not of or from God whatsoever. They don't like that a symbol of sin has been welcomed in. They don't like that Jesus is making decisions to welcome those who used to be excluded. This text that we're going to read today in chapter 10 is an address to the Pharisees right after that. The Pharisees are trying to create a case against Jesus. And Jesus comes out swinging. He calls them thieves and robbers and gatekeepers. He fights against them. And in the ancient world, these words really meant something. Thieves and robbers were everywhere. And people Roman, Jew, Gentile, whatever, hated thieves and robbers. You think you don't like thieves and robbers? This was like the underbelly of the ancient world. If you were labeled a thief and a robber, you were being slandered, unless it was true, right? Terrible people in the eyes of everyone. And they're both kind of different, right? Thieves are sneaky. They're elaborate. They could pick your pocket like a magician, or they could have an elaborate scheme like, say, Ocean's 11. Thieves are sneaky. Robbers are more forceful. Robbers hide behind bushes while you're walking on deserted pathways from town to town and jump out and beat you and steal from you. Either one of these people were desperately terrible people in these times, hated by all. And Jesus alludes to the fact that the Pharisees are behaving like religious versions of these. We're going to read together the 10 verses so you can have full context of what I'm talking about. But this is the context in which this encounter between Pharisees and Jesus comes about. Would you join me in standing as we read the word of the Lord today? John chapter 10, starting with verse 1. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls out his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may find life and have it to the full. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. In the story, Jesus is talking about the pathway to salvation. Who is saved? He says, before me has come thieves and robbers. They come to kill. They come to destroy. All of them have come before me, have not done the work of giving life and rest and pasture. Look back across the history, he's arguing. But my sheep, they know my voice. They've not fallen for the thieves and the robbers. There's lots of things that Jesus is talking about here. There had been would-be messiahs that had come through. There were false teachers. The Pharisees were leading people astray. The Pharisees knew that they were included in this thief and robber motif that Jesus is setting up here, which is interesting because I think a lot of times we look upon the story of Jesus and we so identify with Jesus. We so see him as the protagonist or the good guy. We're pulling for Jesus that we may be tempted at times to say, why would they possibly kill Jesus? He was such a good guy. And, I mean, he was. But the people in power understood that he was cutting at the very foundation on which they had built their entire power structure. Here, Jesus is going to very powerful people and calling them thieves and robbers, people who are deceiving God's people out of their own religious power. You can see why they might be deeply angry and upset at Jesus. There's a tension here at play that is extreme. And every time the Pharisees try to find guilt on Jesus, they come up empty, and Jesus embarrasses them further and further. But here, Jesus tells this figure of speech, and you'd be excused if you're not fully clear on what's happening here, because we're told the people listening weren't fully clear on what's happening here. This figure of speech, this metaphor, this story is deep, it's layered, it's sort of hard to get at. What exactly is Jesus saying here? But for me, what's really, really important is identifying that Jesus says here, there are gatekeepers in the world who are blocking God's sheep from coming into a time of rest and calm and pasture and green grass and relaxation from a world that's trying to kill them, that is fallen, that is sinful, where thieves and robbers run rampant, and there are gatekeepers keeping them from coming in. And what Jesus does not say here rings so powerfully if you can see it. Jesus doesn't say, I am the new gatekeeper. No. Jesus says, I am the gate. You see how powerful a difference that is? If you know where a gate is, you have to find it. You have to be given an address. You have to be given clues, turns, directions. How do I find this gate to get into this pasture of rest from a world that is beating me, killing me, that's fallen, that hurts, that brings anxiety, that brings fear, that brings pain? How do I get to this gate where on the other side there is finally rest for someone like me? First, you have to be told how to get there. Then you have to get past the gatekeeper. Jesus is saying, no more gatekeepers. I'm the gate. Where I am, through me, there is rest from this fallen world. If you find me, if you see me, if you know me, if you come to me, I will bring you to the rest that your body, your soul, your life longs for. Through me, there is rest from this weary and broken world. But yet, there's something sort of end times about this, post-death, like eventually we'll get there. Jesus will bring us rest, but also there is a gift for now as well, because we do not escape this world without encountering thieves and robbers. We don't escape this life without running into gatekeepers who make us feel like we don't live up to the expectation to get into the other side. We will encounter the robbers and thieves of this life. We will experience what it's like to come up by people who seem to just want to kill, destroy us. The thieves and the robbers run rampant in our world today. Who are they? Well, they can be people or they can be things. We live in a world where there are thieves and robbers running rampant. It's not just simple for us to say, okay, well, there are the Pharisees in the text. There are the Pharisees that walk in my neighborhood. It's hard to figure out who the Pharisees are in our diverse world. But yet, there are robbers and thieves. There are politicians who love to tell us everything we want to hear, rather than telling us the truth or working to make the quality of our life better. There are experts over every last issue that comes along, and sometimes those experts disagree. There's partisan news and talk radio filling our heads with ideas that draw wedges and division and confusion in our world. There are people who offer predatory loans. There are sexual predators, chaos agents. All of these can be robbers and thieves in our world today. But it's not always people. Sometimes it's just things. Change can be a robber or a thief. Grief can be a robber or a thief. Death can be a robber or a thief. Losing friends can be a robber or a thief. Things changing too fast, or things changing not fast enough, depending on your perspective, can be a robber or a thief. Crushing bills that charge us more than was delivered to us. Loss of control over narratives that define our lives. Shifting rules in our society about what is good and what is acceptable and what is detestable can be a robber and a thief. It's hard in our world today to have a steady and calm soul. There's so much about the world we live in, the way in which we are operating, that we encounter people, things, issues that unsettle us, that bring about anxiety and chaos in our own life, that finding rest in something as good as a pasture for a sheep, like Jesus is talking about, that seems so inaccessible to us, as if the gatekeeper is always between us and a settled soul that we long for. And some of this is our own fault. We are connected. We always want to be in the know. I read this week that a counselor said that one of the reasons that anxiety is through the roof in the world that we are in today is because we no longer operate just in our own personal stress. We don't just have our problems eating at us. We're also aware of the fact that there's a war raging somewhere in Africa. We know that there are people who are enslaved in parts of our world. We know that there are brutal regimes in the eastern rim of Asia, where people are suffering. We know that a condo in Miami fell to the ground this week. We know when kids are stolen from neighborhoods hours away from us. We know all of the terrible things that are happening, so we're not just processing our own grief and hurt, but we are internalizing grief well outside of our control. We're internalizing problems that we have no say over, but we know and empathize that people are hurting. We're out of control of the problems that come to us. And the more we recognize out of control we are, the more we experience and feel and internalize anxiety. The amount of thieves and robbers in this world keeps multiplying the more we become aware of how many thieves and robbers there are in the world. They may not be stealing from us, but they're stealing from someone. And we know about it, and we're aware about it, and our stress just keeps rising. The offer of Jesus here sounds so good. I am the gate. I'm the gate to the pasture. I'm the gate to the place of rest. I'm the place where the gate you come through and your soul will finally be able to rest. On the other side of me is life. On the other side of me is healing. On the other side of me is release from the anxieties and pressures and hurts of this world. If you come to me, you will find healing, rest, relaxation. You will be released from the robbers and the thieves of this world. And I, as your shepherd, will be your protector. There's a gift of eternity, but also a gift from now. You see, a shepherd doesn't just put their sheep to death and let them seep off into an eternity. Jesus here has a pen, a protected pen. He is the shepherd, and shepherds will put their life on the line in order to make sure that you stay alive. And Jesus is willing just to do that. He wants to protect you from the robbers and the thieves of this world, that your hurt, your anxiety, your pain, your grief would subside. Because you know the voice of the shepherd and you stay close. And when you stay close to the shepherd, when you submit yourself as a sheep, which isn't the most glamorous job in the world, when you submit yourself as a sheep to this shepherd who is Jesus, you will find that there is protection and care and rest. You can let some of the things go when you follow Jesus. And you begin to experience that release in this world now. But as for us, we have anxieties and struggles and fears and unknowns, let alone what's happening out there in the world, the things that we're aware of, the things we have to wrestle with that aren't even our own problems. We have had a year where people are clearly in a place of weariness and struggle. It's hard to know when to re-engage with life, when to build up our stamina for doing things. People feel disengaged. People feel left out. People are uncertain about the future. At Crossroads, here at our own church, the last 4 years have been marked by turnover, by change. And change brings about an anxiety. Now, I believe God has been faithful and will continue to be faithful, but yet here we are staring at more change as more beloved pastors are called by God to go and serve elsewhere. We are left in a place again, once more, where we say, God, what more can we take? What more? What are we going to do? And I know that for the last 4 years ago, a long-term pastor resigned and left. And I know that there are people in this room who long for the old regime and the way things were. And that's okay with me. Everyone has people they connect with. I get it. But since then, it just seems like it's been a series of changes outside of my control, outside of our control. We believe that God is at work, yes, but when will it stop, right? And yet, Jesus says that in moments of difficulty like this, where you don't know where we're going, you don't know what's next, Jesus says, I'm still there as the gate. I'm still there as the shepherd. Hear my voice. Listen for me. Hear what I'm doing. Follow me. Change may feel like walking through a rocky path in a wooded area where robbers are going to come out. We may have that level of anxiety to step into what's next. We're tired, we're beaten up, we're weary, we're just desperate to sit down and have a rest from all of the struggle that we have had. But Jesus says, hear my voice, follow me. I will protect you and I will walk you through a gate that leads you to a pasture where you can rest. This is the struggle of where we are at. We live in a noisy world, and sometimes the noise is evil, and sometimes the noise is beautiful good. But it's noisy. It's hard to hear what God is doing when there are so many voices speaking about the way that it is. It's hard to know what God is doing. And the problem with Jesus, as I see it, is that when the world gets noisy, when our friends get noisy, when our own mind gets noisy, Jesus doesn't yell above it. Like, that's Jesus' problem. I just wish the guy would get a microphone. But he doesn't. Jesus seems to speak in a still, quiet voice. In our work, our responsibility is to tune into that voice and to tune out the rest of the noise. God is at work even in spite of the fears and anxieties and uncertainties and struggle to re-engage and start over and get going. God is at work in the middle of it, and he's not yelling. He's speaking in the same cadence, in the same tone, at the same volume that he's always been speaking. And he's saying, I'm the gate. I'm over here. Come to me. If you enter through me, if you believe, if you trust, if you enter through me, on the other side is a protected area where you will be watched over. You can rest, and you will find good beyond what you could possibly imagine. Stop trying to impress gatekeepers. I am the gate, and I've come to you. Walk through. I will give you rest. I will give you peace. And it will be okay. One of the ways I want to think about this as we're closing, we live in a noisy world. We all know that the struggle is to know the voice of Jesus in this noisy world. And probably often ask, how do I do that? How do I know when it's Jesus' voice? And it's really hard to describe and help. And in some ways, you've got to figure it out for yourself. You've got to come to know his voice. I think that's one of the reasons we gather to worship every week, is because the Spirit moves in such a way that you begin to recognize what is of the Spirit, so that then you can recognize that voice in the rest of your life when you tune into it. But the world is noisy, and there's a lot of people telling you what to do, who to be, where to go, how to act, what to let bother you, what to let not bother you. And Jesus just talks plain and calm through it all. The voice continues, and it gets drowned out by more and more voices in our world. But here's our responsibility in this. I saw this from Beth Moore, the Bible study writer, and I just thought this was a brilliant quote, and I'm sharing with this because it convicted me, okay? I read this and I thought, oh, this is a really strong point, one that I've got to sit in for a little bit. She said this. She said, it's hard to see, you might say it's hard to hear, it's hard to see the true king when you keep crowning human heads. It's hard to see the true king when you keep crowning human heads. I'm convicted by that. We need to crown Jesus. We need to learn the voice of Jesus and hear the voice of Jesus. Not out of some way of conviction so we can be better, do better, anything like that. We need to hear the voice of Jesus because Jesus says, I'm the gate. Rest from your weariness is through me. I'm weary. I'm tired. I'm ready for a break. This year has been too much. I'm sure you join with me in saying that. But Jesus shows up right in the midst of all of that and says what he's always said. I am the gate. My sheep hear my voice. And if they follow me into pasture of protection, of calm, of relaxation, of eternity. I long to hear his voice in the midst of fear, of struggle, tiredness, weariness, anxiety, so that I can again find that peace that he offers, like a sheep lying down in a fully protected pasture. This is where Jesus is taking us. Would you join me in standing as we sing a final song today?